If you're a first-time chainsaw buyer, you're going to want to stick around for this video. The whole goal here is to make that process a little bit less intimidating for you. Hey everyone, it's Jack. I'm filming this intro after I filmed the rest of the video, so that's why the light is a little bit darker than it's going to be in just a second. But I just want to let you guys know that we do finally have merch. I came up with some cool shirt designs that we've got up in a Teespring account. This one is one of my favorites. It says, "I'm one with my chickens," and it's got the little Mindful Homestead logo down there. We are going to change it just a little bit. You'll see it in the store what the actual logo is going to be. However, if you like it and you want to go pick one up, go for it. It helps us out a whole bunch, gives us a little bit extra cash to buy some chicken feed or something like that. All right, let's get on to the video. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Mindful Homestead. Jack here. And today I just want to talk a little bit about chainsaws with everyone. Now, in the last video that we put out, you saw me using a chainsaw. I got some private messages over on the Facebook side of things talking about chainsaws and asking me some general questions about chainsaws. You know, what do I get? I'm looking for one as a homeowner and I don't know where to begin. And I wanted to just put out this video as a little bit of a starting point for somebody that's new to chainsaws, maybe hasn't owned one before. You know, maybe you're new to homesteading and you want to get a chainsaw, but you don't know where to start. And your only experience with chainsaws has been in movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something like that, where there's a mass murderer running around with a chainsaw. And I'm not going to play these things off. They definitely can be dangerous. They're something you want to take seriously. They're not toys, even though they feel like it sometimes. That said, on the homestead, they're also a super valuable tool. Every homeowner should have a chainsaw, whether it's something small that you use in emergency situations or something larger that you can use to fell bigger trees. So what we're going to go over in this video is a really brief description of the pros and cons of gas versus electric saws. In the last few years, electric chainsaws have hit the market and they've gotten a lot better, but we're going to touch briefly on why you might choose one over the other. Really though, that discussion is super in-depth and could be a whole video in and of itself. What I'm really going to touch on mostly with this is buying a gas chainsaw, because that's what I use. For the general homeowner, I think they're a little bit better, and I'll touch on that in a second. We're also going to talk about how to choose the correct gas chainsaw. The most important thing is going to be sizing of that chainsaw. We'll talk about some factors to consider there. And then we're also going to talk about the safety features of modern chainsaws, what features you should definitely look for if you're going to buy a used chainsaw, which I don't necessarily recommend. And then some of the additional things you need to buy if you're picking up a chainsaw. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of different chainsaws out on the market now, and in the last few years, electric chainsaws have gotten pretty popular, especially among the homeowner community and as well in the actual professional cutter community with arborists who go up into the trees. There are some factors that make an electric chainsaw pretty appealing. For one, they're a lot lighter weight than a gas chainsaw. The electric motors that they use in them can generate a lot of torque from a pretty small setup, so you can have a fairly small chainsaw for a pretty powerful saw. They can also be a lot quieter than gas chainsaws. A lot of people, when they pick up a chainsaw, they've seen movies in the past where the villain in a horror movie has used a chainsaw and he's running around and he's buzzing that thing all over his head. For a lot of new users, that creates a situation where going into the experience, they're already a little bit intimidated just because they hear that noise of the two-stroke motor. And if you're new to using a chainsaw, that intimidation is actually a good thing. It's going to inspire you to be a little bit more safe than you might have been if you got right into it with an electric saw. In my mind though, for the homeowner, the advantages of a gas saw outweigh those of electric saws unless you're going to have more than one chainsaw. With a gas saw, you're looking at a saw that's always going to be ready. You don't have to wait for a battery to charge. If the power goes out or in your off-grid situation, these things are really easy to get up and running. You fill them with two-stroke premix and they're good to go. The other advantage to a gas chainsaw is that you're going to have a much higher chain speed on a gas chainsaw than you will on an electric chainsaw. That higher chain speed will let you do more work and get your work done faster. Now, for the beginner, a really high chain speed can actually be a bad thing. There's a lot of professional saws on the market that have extremely high chain speeds, and that allows those professional loggers or arborists to get their work done much quicker. The problem with a fast chain speed on a homeowner saw is that it's going to allow you to get into trouble quicker. For instance, if you're felling a tree and you cut too quickly on your back cut, you're going to cut through your holding wood, and that could create an unsafe situation in which direction the tree is going to fall. That said, in the homeowner saw market, there's a lot of chainsaws that aren't going to have chain speeds that are too fast. This particular saw from Husqvarna or any of the steel homeowner saws, those saws are going to have lower chain speeds than their professional saws, and they're perfectly adequate and safe to use for homeowners. The other reason I like gas chainsaws is that they are typically user serviceable. If you're handy with a wrench, you can take these things apart and put them back together and do a lot of the work on your own. With an electric chainsaw, if something were to go wrong on the inside, even though they tend to not have as many problems in the long run, if something does go wrong, you're going to have to bring it somewhere and have it fixed. And the jury is still out on how expensive those things are going to be to take care of. The high quality electric saws that are out now have only been around for a few years, so long term they haven't necessarily been tested to the point where we can see what repair costs are going to be. So after all of that, my recommendation for the homeowner is that you purchase a gas operated chainsaw. So what decisions do you need to make when you're purchasing a chainsaw? One of the first things you're going to need to do is decide what you're doing with that saw. If you just want a chainsaw to store in the garage or barn to keep for emergency situations, like a tree coming down across your driveway or cutting some brush or something like that, you can get by with a much different saw than if you're going to be out harvesting your own firewood in your woodlot, or if you're going to be felling trees to build something with. Really, the two biggest considerations when you're buying a chainsaw as a homeowner is how big of a bar do you want to run and how much weight are you comfortable carrying. Your bar is going to have a direct impact on both the weight and the type of cutting that you're going to be doing with that saw. A saw like this has a 20-inch bar on it and is good for most medium to medium large felling jobs. It's also good if I want to be going through and cutting up firewood from a truckload of medium to medium large sized logs. As far as felling goes, I'm not going to be going out and taking out any huge old growth trees or even, big white pines and things like that. The 20-inch bar on this, it doesn't give me enough reach. And while a professional feller can get in there and utilize this saw to cut down those type of trees, as a homeowner, I'm not comfortable doing that. Chainsaws are typically going to come in bar lengths of even sizes, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, and up. Professional sawyers, they may use up to a 30-inch bar on some of their saws if they're going through big old growth forests. For the homeowner, I don't think anything more than a 20-inch bar is typically what you're going to need. There's both advantages and disadvantages to going with longer or shorter bars. A shorter bar is going to be more nimble. It's going to create a saw that is more easy to wield, and you can take that saw and work longer over the course of the day with it. A longer bar, however, is going to make your back hurt less. For instance, if you fell a big tree and you need to go through and limb that tree, which is cutting the branches off of the trunk, a longer bar is going to make that easier for you. But at the same time, if you're an inexperienced saw user or a beginner, or you don't have a lot of time around chainsaws, that longer bar also becomes a liability because it's going to be closer to your feet. Essentially, a longer bar, while it makes the work easier in the long run for a professional or an experienced sawyer, it becomes a little bit more of a liability for a homeowner. Another disadvantage to running a longer bar is that it's going to add weight to the saw, and it's going to add that weight out on the saw. Generally, you want your saw to balance at that front handle, and as you can see here, with this 20-inch bar, the saw is almost perfectly balanced. It takes very little effort to move it up and down. When you move to a longer bar, not only does it add weight to the overall package, but it also puts that weight further out from the fulcrum point of the saw and just makes you work a little bit harder. And this one's a little bit selfish of me, but longer bars typically have more teeth, and more teeth means longer to sharpen. I like to get in and sharpen my saws quickly and get out and work with them rather than spending a whole lot of time sitting down with a file. If you're one of those people that gets down on nerding out over sharpening knives or blades or things like that, go for a longer bar if you want to. And if you're going to spend more time sharpening it, that might be fun for you. Not for me. So the size of the engine on your saw is going to have a lot to do with the size of the bar that you can run, and it's going to have a lot to do with the overall weight of the saw. Bigger engines equal more weight, but they also mean you can run bigger bars, and they'll also mean that you can typically get faster chain speeds out of it. Faster chain speed, as I mentioned before, is going to allow you to do more work in a quicker amount of time. On the flip side though, for the homeowner, I always like to mention that a lighter weight saw, while the chain speed may be slower or it might have slightly less power, is actually an asset to the recreational or infrequent user in the long run. If you have a big job that you need to get handled, a lighter weight saw is going to allow you to work longer because you're not fatiguing yourself lugging around a heavy saw. This particular saw comes in at just over 13 pounds with a 20-inch bar and chain. For me, as a big guy, that's not necessarily a lot of weight to be lugging around for a day, but for somebody like Jackie or a smaller person, it's going to be a lot of saw, and it's not necessarily something that you want to take on, especially when it's something that can hurt you pretty easily. So the nice advantage here is that homeowner saws come in a variety of different sizes. Husqvarna itself in this 400 series goes from a 430 to a 435 to a 440 to a 450, 455, all the way up to 460. So they have a variety of different saws out there that clock in at a bunch of different weights, and whatever you're looking for, you can size a saw to yourself, both in terms of what you're going to be cutting and also what you need to physically be able to handle. A good starting point that I like to tell people is to look for a 16 to 20 inch bar in a saw that fits you comfortably. That type of saw is going to be really good for general purpose use anywhere on your homestead, whether you need to fell a sizable tree or just cut up firewood or even just clear some brush. In terms of buying new versus used, I like to personally recommend that people buy a new saw, especially if they're getting a first chainsaw. The reason I like to tell people to go out and buy a new saw for their first saw is that you know there's not going to be any technical issues that show up with that saw in the first year or so of use. A lot of saws now will come with a warranty, which is great because they are power equipment and things can go wrong with them. With a used saw, you don't know exactly what you're getting. You don't know how that saw was run in the past, what premix they used, if they used good gasoline, if they used old gasoline, if they used a terrible two-stroke oil, if that saw had been run dry, which is using gas that didn't have two-stroke oil in it, if that engine had been rebuilt. There's a whole host of issues that can go wrong with a used chainsaw, including some of the safety features that you don't necessarily know if they're functioning or not. So for a new user, if you're not familiar with the features on a chainsaw or inspecting a chainsaw, I'd always recommend going out and buying a new chainsaw. Preferably from a reputable saw shop in your area that can also service the saw for you down the line. But if you don't have one of those in your area, or you don't feel comfortable, or price is extremely important to you, you can also visit a box store like Lowe's or Home Depot, and they will have saws of good quality there that you can purchase. I can't think of one chainsaw that's on the market today that doesn't come with at least some safety features that are going to keep you safe. As we talked about before, these things can be super dangerous. They will go through flesh in an instant before you even know what's going on. I remember reading a statistic that said something like the average number of stitches from a chainsaw injury was 185. And I don't know about you, but I don't want 185 stitches any day of the week with any machine. So keeping yourself safe around these things is important. And modern chainsaws that are on the market today do have a whole host of safety features that are built into the saw to keep you safe if something were to go sideways. One of the most effective and probably important features that you're going to find on a modern chainsaw is the chain brake. Right there. This chain brake, when it engages, locks up the clutch inside this saw and prevents this chain from moving at all. If the saw was running and the chain brake were to be engaged, this chain would stop almost instantaneously. And these chain brakes are designed to work on inertia. If I was working with this saw and sawing and it was to kick back and come back up at me, my wrist is going to hit that brake before the saw gets to my face. Nobody wants a running chainsaw coming at their face like this, especially when the chain is moving. These chain brakes have saved lives, so it's very important that when you get a saw, you test it, you make sure it's working. You want to buy a saw that has a chain brake to begin with. There's saws out there that don't, and people list them for sale every day on Craigslist. And if it's an old saw and you're selling it as a collectible piece, that's totally cool, I get it. But for a user who's going to be using a saw, I don't think it's something that should be passed on. They're dangerous, they're not safe. There's no way to make a saw without a chain brake safe, and those are just my feelings on it. You may disagree, and that's okay. If you do, leave it in the comments down below. Love to have a discussion with you. Another feature that you're going to find on modern saws that I like to have is an anti-kickback chain, and that chain is going to have rakers in front of your chisel teeth, and what happens is the teeth will catch something in the wood and they'll flick that saw back like that. There's rakers on modern chains that are angled in front of your cutting teeth, and what that allows the saw to do is it actually bounces that saw up and over a spot in the wood where it's going to catch. It makes it so the saw is less likely to kick back, and while it's not going to prevent all instances of kickback, it actually is pretty effective in negating that. There are other companies on the market that have physical guards at the end of the bar that can help you avoid kickback. Homelight had one back in the day that actually covered the entire tip of this bar here that prevented that bar from coming in contact with wood. It added weight to the saw, and it did limit the saw's use if you were trying to cut into big wood where you didn't have that effective use at the end. So it kind of went away, but there are still saws out there with it, and if you come across it, just be aware that that's what it is. Another feature that I consider mandatory in all modern chainsaws is the use of anti-vibration technology in the handle. These things, because they have a single cylinder motor in them that's buzzing at a pretty high RPM, these things can get pretty choppy on your hands. They cause a lot of vibrations. Gloves can help with that, but if you can mitigate that before it even gets to the handle of the saw, it's a great feature to have. Another feature that seems like a no-brainer but should be mentioned is you want an effective kill switch. Some chainsaws will have a tiny little rocker switch somewhere on the casing, and that's great and all if you know that it's there, but in a situation where you need to kill that saw quickly, you may not think to reach for it, or somebody who's with you may not know where that switch is on the saw. Husqvarnas are nice. Right next to the handle, there's a big red kill switch. All you have to do is push it down, and that kills the saw. Other chainsaw manufacturers out there that know what they're doing make their kill switches easy to engage as well. So just look for that kill switch, know how to use it. And if you're out in the woods cutting with somebody, make sure they know how to use the kill switch as well. So now let's get into what everybody loves to talk about, which is what brand of chainsaw should you buy? Behind me, you see a Husqvarna. I like Husqvarna chainsaws. I know a lot of other people do as well. It's kind of like the Ford versus Chevy debate between Husqvarna and Stihl. Stihl's a great chainsaw as well. You're not going to go wrong really with buying either a Husqvarna or a Stihl, or Steel, depending how you want to pronounce it. If you're for one brand, you're going to be die hard that brand until you die. If you're for the other brand, you're going to promote that brand, you know, till the end. The bottom line here is that both Stihl and Husqvarna make good saws, and you can't go wrong buying either of them. If there's a Husqvarna dealer nearby and that dealer is good to you and that's who you feel comfortable working with, buy a Husky. If there's a Stihl dealer nearby and they're a good dealer, buy a Stihl. It really doesn't come down to anything but personal preference with those two brands. They're both great. People are going to argue in the comments over which is better, but they're both good. Buy either one. Other manufacturers that come to mind that are in this bracket: Jonsered, Echo, Poulan Pro. Notice I said Poulan Pro and not Poulan. Poulan is a cheap brand that you can find in Walmart and places like that, department stores. They're definitely not great saws. They're not going to be on the level of something you would buy from Husqvarna or Stihl, except some of the really lower end Husqvarna stuff is actually made by Poulan. It gets super confusing, but in this bracket of homeowner saws, you can't go wrong with a Husky, you can't go wrong with a Stihl. You also can't go wrong with a Jonsered, an Echo, or Poulan Pro. The differences there is that their dealer network is not going to be as extensive as Husqvarna or Stihl. You may have to go a little bit further for service, or if you need to order a part, you might have to get it online. It might not be available at your local power sports supply house. Either way, if you're looking at those brands, you really should plan to spend $350 to $500 on a good homeowner saw. There are saws that definitely are in the lower price bracket. You can go 180, you can go 220, things like that, and they're okay. But really, with these saws in that slightly higher price bracket, you're getting the ability that they're not just going to change it and move to a completely different part structure in a couple years. They're not going to use weird pitch chains. They're going to use bars that have been in production for years. Moving into that slightly higher price saw, the manufacturer is planning on you owning that saw for a longer period of time, so there's going to be much longer support lifetime on that versus some of the other stuff. What else do you need to go with your saw? Well, first and foremost, most important thing you could possibly get when you're buying a chainsaw: chainsaw chaps. These things are a lifesaver, literally, for many people out there. They are comprised of polyester blocking materials that when a saw is run into this, those materials get sucked out by the chain and they gum up the gear, which is right there. It stops the chain virtually instantaneously. Government testing allows for a 1/4 inch of pass-through. Now, a 1/4 inch is definitely not going to make your day. You're not going to be super psyched to go to the hospital with a 1/4 inch deep gash in your leg. However, the flip side to that, remember that little statistic I gave about average number of stitches in a chainsaw injury, is right down to the bone in less than a second. And that's not something anybody wants to deal with. So for the less than $100 that these things cost, for a nice pair, this is a pair from Arborwear. It's called their Rack Chap. It's got a stretchy waistband. It's got replaceable and adjustable leg straps that are also stretchy. These things are great. They retail. The most expensive pair, which is a tall, full calf wrap, is going to run you 95 bucks. Maybe 100 bucks. I forget. I'll put a link to these down in the description below so you can check them out. If you're a homeowner and you're buying chaps, this is what I recommend wholeheartedly. They're the nicest chaps on the market in this price range, and for the general user, they're going to keep you safe. They're going to keep you from becoming a statistic if you run the saw into your leg. So always pick up chaps, always buy a pair. If you don't have a pair of chaps, there's not a saw shop on the planet that should let you out of there without a pair of chaps. So just buy them, just do it. Don't even question it. Budget to buy a pair of chaps when you leave with your store. Did I mention you should buy chaps? Just do it. going to beat this horse until it's dead because I know people that have run saws into themselves and they're alive today because they were wearing chaps or chainsaw pants. So buy chaps. The next thing you're going to need, eyes and ears. First off, my glasses, I do have impact resistant polycarbonate lenses in these. So when I'm cutting with a chainsaw, I just wear my glasses and they're good enough. I'm not going to have a chip that goes flying into my eye and causes me to become injured that way. However, if you don't wear prescription glasses or you don't have a pair of prescription impact resistant glasses, your best bet is just going to be to get a pair of safety glasses. You can pick them up cheap. You can get safety goggles. Those will work as well. They're a little bit more uncomfortable to wear than just a pair of safety glasses, but you want something to protect your eyes. The other thing you want is something to protect your ears. Chainsaws are loud, and I am guilty of it. In the last video, I wasn't wearing ear protection. You want to wear ear protection. That can be something as nice as a full-on, earmuff that you might wear if you're into shooting guns, or something just as simple as the little foam earplugs. I definitely need to be better about it. I like to hear what's going on around me. If somebody yells for me from the other side of the house, that's kind of my own hang up, and I need to work through that. If you have the money, there are a lot of really nice products on the market that combine a face shield, ear protection, and a helmet into one. You can find them at any local saw shop. I think even Lowe's carries them. Last time I was in there, I saw them. So something to think about. You can purchase those if you like and go that route. Lastly, you're going to want a good set of gloves. These are nice for keeping your hands warm if it's a little bit chilly out. If you're going to be running a saw for a long period of time, having gloves on is nice because it makes things a little bit less fatiguing. The other nice thing about them is that if you happen to brush your hand up against a chain or something like that, these are going to provide a little bit more safety to you than not having a pair of gloves on. Chainsaws are not necessarily razor sharp. However, the chains on these can be pretty sharp, and if you catch your finger in a weird way or something like that, even with the saws not moving, you can definitely cut yourself pretty good. Lastly, you're going to want to make sure that you're putting good gas and good quality oil into this thing. You're going to need a good quality two-stroke oil. Some people run synthetic, some people run a natural oil. Really, it's up to you. You want to pay attention to the ratio that you want to mix your oil to gas at. Usually it's on the saw. Sometimes if you're using a high quality synthetic, it'll come with the synthetic oil and tell you if your saw says 50 to 1, you run this at 100 to 1. But you want to use good quality gas and you want to use a good quality oil. A lot of people will tell you you need to run ethanol-free gas in your saws. And that was true 10 to 15 years ago. However, all modern saws that you're buying today, they come with components that are rated to handle ethanol gas. That said, you still don't want to let the gas sit in your saw for extended periods of time. Over time, gas can essentially gum up. It'll make your saw run funny. It'll make you have to get in there and clean the carb out. It's not the end of the world if it happens, but if you can avoid it, it's always nice. The other thing you want to take note of with your saw is that you want to get a high quality bar oil. I typically will run Husqvarna bar oil. I've never had a problem with it. Bar oil is applied automatically by the saw to the bar so that the chain glides smoothly in its track. That bar oil is going to prevent wear on the bar. It's going to make your chain last longer. It's going to make your bar last longer. And it's going to protect your investment over time. So that's pretty much all I got for you. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down below. I definitely probably missed something in this, and I'm not going to be as helpful as somebody at your local saw shop. But hopefully, having seen this video, it's given you a little bit more to think about and giving you a little bit more of what you should be looking for in your first chainsaw. Hopefully it makes you feel a little bit more comfortable with the buying process. Like I said, these things are great tools to have on your homestead or small farm. They make life infinitely easier than using an old school bow saw or something like that. As always, thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and we'll see you around. Bye.